campaign for presidential election in 1912 was an intense one, involving three stalwarts: Woodrow Wilson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Howard Taft. At the end of it, however, Woodrow Wilson won handsomely. The presidency of Woodrow Wilson breathed a new life into American politics.
Republicans like Theodore Roosevelt, followed by Howard Taft, had done much in the age of progressivism. They had corrected many abuses of the capitalist system. But nevertheless, they had not been able to touch the hardcore of common people. So their reforms had mostly come from above and very few from below. That's why people wanted a change. And they wanted a Democrat to come as president, and Woodrow Wilson got elected. And therefore, if we really include Woodrow Wilson in the bandwagon of progressive reformers, then that will be slightly misnomer, because he was not really a successor to what Theodore Roosevelt actually had done. But he is included as one of the presidents who also belong to the progressive America.
Sir, and then in what sense is Woodrow Wilson a torch bearer of progressivism?
Progressivism literally means towards progress. Progress means people's welfare here, towards more people's welfare, more altruism, more humanism. If we take that meaning of progressivism, then Woodrow Wilson was really a champion, an embodiment of that kind of progressivism. But progressivism also was conservative, cautious, pro-plutocrat, etc., which was the trend set by Theodore Roosevelt. So though he belongs to the genre of progressivism, he does not really hold the torch for Theodore Roosevelt. But since the blanket term is progressivism for this entire period down to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he is somehow linked to the progressive program. He is linked to progressive program in its human face, in its noble side, and not on the seamy side, as in many cases it happened with Theodore Roosevelt or Howard Taft.
Woodrow Wilson was born in Staunton, Virginia, on December 28, 1856, as the third of four children of the Presbyterian minister Reverend Dr. Joseph Ruggles Wilson and Jessie Janet Woodrow. Woodrow Wilson spent his childhood in Georgia and South Carolina. Much of his early education came from his father at home. In 1875, he entered the College of New Jersey, now Princeton University, graduating in 1879. After a brief period at the Law School of the University of Virginia, he studied on his own and passed the Georgia Bar examination. Bored as a lawyer in Atlanta, he enrolled at Johns Hopkins University, where he earned a PhD in History and Political Science in 1886. He was married to Ellen Axon of Rome, Georgia in 1885. They had 3 daughters. After the demise of Axon in 1914, Wilson married Edith Galt. His first book, Congressional Government, 1885, became a classic of political analysis and was followed by 6 other works. Wilson was a teacher at Bryn Mawr College near Philadelphia and at the Wesleyan University in Connecticut. In 1890, he joined Princeton University as faculty. After a successful academic career as an author and professor at Bryn Mawr Wesleyan and Princeton, Wilson was elected president of Princeton in 1902. In that office, his efforts to modernize the college fetched him attention as a progressive reformer, and in 1910 New Jersey Democrats nominated him as its candidate for the post of governor. He resigned his university post and was later elected governor of New Jersey. This was literally the launching pad for his progress towards the presidency.
When he became president, he did not call his program any deal. People very much expected him to perform in the right interests of the people. They wanted him to really achieve what in Benthamite terms would be the greatest good of the greatest number. He tried his level best to achieve that target. That was Woodrow Wilson's ambition. So he wanted to have another set of reforms which would be called new by his generation. That was his feeling. And freedom he added because he really wanted freedom of the masses. He really wanted freedom of the common toiling masses. There, particularly farmers, peasants, farmers and industrial workers and all these people, sailors. He wanted to do something for these grassroots people. And therein lies freedom. You know, if you do something for the emancipation or privilege of the elite people, that is not really freedom. If you work for the common people and gaining them a few points of liberty, that is called freedom. That's why he used the word freedom in this case. When he became president, his first thing was that privilege has taken too much ascendancy in American politics. So he, first of all, must cut down on privilege, and instead he would emphasize more on equal opportunities. So from privilege to equal opportunity would be his transformation, which is part of New Freedom once again.
So, sir, can we say that he is a true representative of American democracy?
Yes, why not? He is a successful torchbearer of that democratic tradition. From Jefferson to Jackson to Lincoln, he is very close to the personality of Lincoln in many ways. We know from his later years when he went to the Versailles Conference, he took these convictions to even Versailles Conference. He was talking about the end of colonialism, establishment of individual rights and democracy, self-determination of post-colonial states, etc., etc. So, had it not been his conviction, he wouldn't have carried it to the foreign platform. So, he really was a successor to the American democratic tradition, which was nurtured by men like Lincoln. What Square Deal has done was concession to common people. But he was looking from below. He was trying to achieve freedom for common people. Privilege must end. Equal opportunities must come. And he says that government policy will not be a private concern. It will be a public concern. All legislation should be public concern, not a private concern. By that he had a jibe against the previous policies, which were all dictated by private concern of the plutocrats. Against that, he would espouse something which can be called public policy for the public, of the public, by the public, and for the public. So that was his departure. So he may be linked to deal measures, he may be linked to progressivism, but there is that kind of new freedom in it, no doubt about that. He is a hyphen between the two Roosevelts. So that is the, in answer to your question, I can say that he made quite a departure in the whole program.
Woodrow Wilson also had a package of reforms much like Theodore Roosevelt had in his Square Deal. Although they were similar in nature, the approach of Wilson was different. One important element in his package of reforms was the anti-tariff laws.
He begins with what he calls anti-tariff laws. It is same as what was Interstate Commerce Act in Theodore Roosevelt's program. He thought that tariff was favorable to the plutocrats, unfavorable to the common masses. So this was also a privilege which he must cut down. So he began with this kind of anti-tariff laws, particularly reducing tariff for many common consumer goods. If you have a very high tariff wall, then only the trusts and monopolies thrive. If you have a lower tariff wall, then common companies and common people benefit. So first step was anti-tariff law or reduction of tariff. That he did. This is one of the main items for him. And of course then antitrust laws.
To cut the trusts and monopolies to size, Woodrow Wilson introduced two antitrust laws, namely the Sherman Acts and the Clayton Act.
During his time, there was the Sherman Act, there was the Clayton Act, by which he attacked the trusts and monopolies. Particularly, he was severe on the Morgan Money Trust. Because the money trust, you know, is a very vicious kind of trust. He not only cornered banking and money lending by making credit inflexible, they monopolized money supply to the nation, and whimsically they would supply money to the trusts only, to the big tycoons only, and money flow for common people for reduction of prices or improvement of wages was not coming to them. Therefore, money trusts had to be broken. And under these two acts, Sherman Act and Clayton Act, money trust was being demolished. And money supply to common people was ensured. So that was another measure by him. And the measure for which he is very much adored is called Farm Loan Act. This is the implementation of what we can call the La Follette's Wisconsin idea.
Wilson's keenness to learn more about agrarian economy took him to Wisconsin. Here he met Robert M. La Follette, the governor, and was quite impressed by the Wisconsin idea that the latter championed.
In La Follette's governorship at Wisconsin, we find a lot of legislations were passed at a state level, benefiting the farmer, benefiting the peasant, and all kinds of benefits were given for better agriculture, better wages, equipments, fertilizers and all, Forestry Act. In many ways, wherever a farmer would have to benefit, that was ensured in the Wisconsin program. And this has been hailed in American history as the Wisconsin idea, because La Follette is also a character in the book by Hofstadter's American Political Tradition and the men who made it. La Follette is also a maker of American tradition. Though he was at the governor level, he never became a president like William Jennings Bryan. He never became a president, but he molded the thoughts of Woodrow Wilson. So these are the influences over him, and therefore Farm Loan Act was passed. Now in the earlier deal measures, it was all concerned with industries and trade. Here in the New Freedom, for the first time, agriculture and farmers are addressed. They got easy loans for the first time. Like Andrew Jackson had ensured sub-treasury system from the Federal Bank, Bank of United States. Similar kind of thing was developed here under the Farm Loan Act by Woodrow Wilson. So that was also a very important act. And then he also passed what is known as Adamson Act. The Adamson Act was a proposal to benefit the sailors. In America, particularly on the eastern seaboard, there were so many port towns, and sailing was a common practice. Sailors, traders, peddlers, they were very common, ordinary people, grassroots people. And they frequently, after their navigation, they fell sick. They needed hospital facilities, other things. This was never provided by the previous governments. But Woodrow Wilson took care to protect the sailors and seamen, the vagrants who had moved out of the country and come back with wealth. Both rural and urban, common people entered into a presidential program. That democracy was broad-based and made on the solid foundation of the support of the common people, which the earlier governments were losing very fast. And his victory was the victory of American democracy from that point of view. So these are some of his very important measures, which can be called the New Freedom Package.
So, sir, this new freedom, was it a break or a continuity of the Square Deal?
You have already stated that. I consider that it was a break. Though within the overall rubric of progressivism, it was a break. It was more pro-people. It was from below, it was more pro-people, common workers, common foresters, common businessmen. They for the first time had a better deal from the federal government, which was not there before. It's a rainbow concept, progressivism. At one end you can find men like Theodore Roosevelt, Howard Taft. On the other end you have a person like Woodrow Wilson, and halfway also FDR. He also had many such democratic measures during his time. So here you are, that Woodrow Wilson is having a break with the past. At the same time he is under the rubric of progressivism. But then his distinct place has to be recognized, and he must be credited for that in American history. Now, after he had done all these things, we have the last section, that is making an overall estimate of Woodrow Wilson.
Woodrow Wilson was a man of principle who lived for the values that he had inherited from his father, Reverend Joseph Wilson, Governor Robert M. La Follette, and his Democratic predecessors, Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson. He believed in equal distribution of wealth and opportunities. He believed that the greatest vice of all was privilege. Professor Bartlett, therefore, concludes by saying,
and from his background, his attitude, his work, for everything, he really comes out as a Democrat, an idealist and a humanist. He was not merely a realist or a practical politician of the earlier genre. He was a departure. So his commitment to common people, commitment to democracy, commitment to freedom, commitment to greatest good of the greatest number are genuine. We cannot apply Weinstein's theory that he was also putting a life belt under capitalism. Though American economy was liberal capitalism at that time, no doubt about that. He did not try to stop the progress of capitalism, that he did not do. But he applied all kinds of democratic checks, pro-people measures, to a country which had become very selfish in favor of big tycoons. That major lapse, anomaly, was corrected by Woodrow Wilson. So I would give him that benefit of his commitment to ideology, commitment to common people. These things were all genuine. And abroad also you know that when he fought for 14 points for securing democracy in the world, making the world safe for democracy, and securing self-determination of the people and end of colonialism and all that. It was needless for him. As a practical politician, he didn't have done that because he had high-minded idealism. He had carried all those things to the world platform that he had done. So it shows his courage of conviction. That is, he was a genuine man, authentic man. We use this word authentic to Mahatma Gandhi. Others are not that authentic. They might have a lot of spoken, mouthed, lot of policies, lot of pro-people attitudes, but actually they didn't carry out. Whereas he said and also made it a practice in his case. So he appears to be a more authentic man than many presidents before him or after him. He's very close to, I can say, Abraham Lincoln from that point of view. Very close to. He's the last of the messiahs of American democracy. So I had said that America had this tradition. American political tradition was a capitalist tradition. Economic and political is capitalist aristocratic tradition. But there is also a democratic tradition.
So, sir, is America today more democratic or more capitalistic?
It is capitalist democracy, I can say that. Because capitalism could be ruled out, and it increasingly after the defeat of communism everywhere in the world, it shows that without capitalism, without making of wealth, no nation can progress. So capitalism stays on, but it has to be humanized, vitalized by democracy. So he brought that later part, that is humanizing capitalism. Capitalism was not ruled out. Nobody today would like to rule out capitalism. But if democracy is breathed into it, that becomes an ideal combination of political economy. I am reminded of Francis Fukuyama, End of History and Man. There he says, now that communism has failed everywhere, capitalism stays on. And capitalism also has a very ugly face. As Karl Marx said, blood and dirt on capitalism. So that was there. But then, if there is a vigorous democracy, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, James Bryce said. So, if there is that kind of a vigilance, that kind of democratic check, then capitalism should really be welfareist, pro-people at the same time. Capitalism itself is not a vice. Many Marxists think that capitalism, the word is a dirty word. It's not so. Capitalism is not a dirty word, but because the democratic checks were not placed in the right position, because education of the common people was not advanced, because proper welfare was not taken, therefore it had its ugly face. But once all these measures are taken, more democracy, more consciousness, more vigilance, more education, more social reform, if all these inputs are given, then capitalism remains the best system, no doubt about that. So I would agree with Francis Fukuyama that it has to be capitalism married to democracy. And who was the matchmaker? Woodrow Wilson. He was the matchmaker. He really married these two concepts very well in his life, and that is my final estimate of Woodrow Wilson. But you know, in the world stage, he was simply whisked out. His suggestion of 14 points was thrown out, rejected by British Prime Minister Lord George or French Prime Minister Clemenceau. They all rejected him as a fool. As a fool. They were distributing privileges after the First World War, and he was talking about principles. He was thrown out. One journalist who attended that conference, American journalist Abe Martin, even says that all that we got out of Versailles Conference was out. In bitterness, he said so. But what was in has to be judged by historians. The great principles which has moved humanity, which have moved history, has come from those 14 points. And from that, Nehru derived his Panchsheel. So you know that history of democracy, Woodrow Wilson has greater contribution than merely only within the frontiers of America. He is a man larger than life. He has a world stage. Other presidents didn't have a world stage, so to say. Of course, Franklin Delano Roosevelt had a world stage. But before him, Woodrow Wilson has a world stage. He is one of the greatest presidents that Americans had ever seen. From that point of view, I have my humble tribute to Woodrow Wilson, a philosopher president.
In this episode, Dr. Chitrabrata Palith has dwelt upon the presidency of Woodrow Wilson. He first discussed the background of Woodrow Wilson's ideology. During this discussion, Dr. Palith has called him the missing link between Theodore Roosevelt and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Wilson termed his progressivism as New Freedom. In New Freedom, he tried to address the crisis of American capitalism with an endeavor to help common people. Before him, Theodore Roosevelt and Taft were working from above. So that was a great departure. His brand of humanism can be traced to his life sketch provided by Dr. Palith. Wilson was a man from New Jersey who went over to Princeton University, had his education, and became president there. But a university was too small a place for him to grow and show his mettle. So he entered politics, was elected governor of New Jersey as the Democratic Party's candidate, and finally won the presidential election, defeating both Theodore Roosevelt and Howard Taft. Dr. Palith discussed the package of reforms introduced by Woodrow Wilson. He abolished all privileges to provide equal opportunity for all Americans. He ensured that all policies must be public policies, that tariff should be rationalized for the common people's benefit, that trust must be weakened. The Sherman and Clayton Antitrust Acts were ample proof of his determination. But Wilson's greatest contribution was the Farm Loan Act, which was taken from La Follette's Wisconsin idea. There, he tried to ensure that farmers got a good deal, had easy access to credit for buying equipment, fertilizer, had protection for their land, and got a good price for their agricultural crops. Consequently, he thought of the poor sailors who sailed for months together and came back impoverished as well as ill. For them, he passed the Adamson Act. So Wilson's new freedom lay in his concern for the sailors, peasants, small farmers, small businessmen, and average consumers. Finally, Dr. Palith makes an estimation of Woodrow Wilson. It is often asked whether Wilson was a torchbearer of square deal propounded by Theodore Roosevelt. But according to Dr. Palith, Wilson had his own niche in the whole tradition. Dr. Palith concluded by saying that America had two kinds of tradition. One was the American capitalist tradition, and the other was the American liberal tradition. Wilson can be considered to be a matchmaker who wedded capitalism to democracy. He had, in fact, provided an antithesis to communism, which was on the ascendancy after the First World War. For him, the generation of wealth through capitalist means was not bad, but he was for a more proactive role of the government in ensuring redistribution of that wealth.